I never thought I'd have the kind of life where I'd end up writing about this. Back in the day, my wife, Kelly, and I were the couple everyone envied, young, no kids yet, but with a solid career and plenty of free time to enjoy life. We didn't have any glaring problems that I could see, so what happened next blindsided me in ways I couldn't have imagined. It all started innocently enough. Kelly had taken a new job about 6 months ago, and she often worked late. She was juggling tight deadlines, client meetings, and what felt like endless presentations. She didn't drive much anymore, relying on rideshares to get her home when the nights ran long. I didn't think much of it at first. I even encouraged it, joking that it was one less chance of her dinging up the car. But then there was Tim. At first, I didn't know his name. I'd just hear snippets about this one driver, who was always so reliable and so polite. Kelly made a point of saying she gave him 5-star ratings every time. I didn't think anything of it. She had always been chatty and polite with service workers. But then she started requesting him specifically. "Oh, it's just easier this way," she said when I questioned her. "He knows the route to work, he doesn't talk too much, and he's always on time. You'd love him, he's a total professional." It wasn't weird enough to make me suspicious, not yet, but it did stick in my mind. Especially when her rides started taking longer. "Traffic," she'd say. Or, "Tim thought this route was quicker." The first red flag came one Friday night. Kelly had gone out with her coworkers for a dinner that stretched into drinks. She called me around 10:30 to let me know she was heading home and not to wait up. I didn't think twice about it, but when I saw the receipt for her ride the next morning, I noticed something odd. The drop-off location wasn't our house. It was a random address across town. When I asked her about it, she waved it off. "Oh, Tim must have entered the wrong thing," she said quickly, grabbing her coffee. "You know how the app glitches sometimes." I nodded, but something didn't sit right. I mean, I wasn't the jealous type, but the way she brushed it off felt off. Still, I let it go. For a while anyway. Over the next few weeks, things got stranger. Kelly was spending more time, working late, even on weekends. She'd come home with her makeup still fresh and smelling like the perfume she'd wear on date nights, not the muted scent she usually wore to work. When I brought it up, she'd laugh. "You're imagining things, babe. I'm just tired." And maybe I was. Until the night I accidentally saw her phone. She'd fallen asleep on the couch after one of her long days. Her phone was propped up on the armrest, buzzing with a message. I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear. But when I glanced at the screen, there it was. "Tim, tonight was amazing. Same time tomorrow?" Amazing? Same time tomorrow? That was when I realized something wasn't right. "Let me know if you want me to continue." That message from Tim sat in my head like an unwelcome guest, replaying over and over. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but how could I not? Tonight was amazing. What was amazing? A ride home? Was he talking about some conversation they had? I told myself I was overthinking it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. The next day, Kelly acted normal. Too normal, if you asked me. She kissed me goodbye in the morning, humming as she grabbed her bag. She even teased me about being grumpy. "Don't pout, babe. I'll make it up to you this weekend." Make it up to me for what, exactly? That night, I decided to test something. Kelly texted around 7 p.m. to say she'd be working late again. "I'll grab a ride home," she said. "Don't wait up." Yeah, no. Instead of lounging on the couch like I usually did, I grabbed my jacket and keys and drove downtown. Her office building was quiet, most of the lights off. I parked across the street and waited. By 8:30, I saw her step out the front doors. She wasn't alone. A familiar car pulled up, and she climbed into the passenger seat. It was Tim. I followed them. I know, it sounds crazy, but my gut told me to keep going. They didn't head toward our house, not even close. Instead, they stopped at a nearby park, the kind that's dark and empty after sundown. I parked a few rows away and watched as they sat there, talking, laughing. Then it happened. Tim leaned over, and Kelly didn't pull away. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. The woman I trusted with everything, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was leaning into another man's kiss. I wanted to storm over there, yank her out of the car, and demand answers. But something stopped me. Call it shock, or maybe the need for proof. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started recording. The angle wasn't great, but it was enough to show what was happening. They didn't stay long. After about 15 minutes, the car pulled out, and I followed at a safe distance. They ended up at a small diner on the edge of town. She was holding his arm as they walked inside, her laughter carrying through the still night air. When they left the diner an hour later, they didn't drive toward home. They drove to an empty lot. And that's when I saw them, fully illuminated by the glow of the dashboard lights, her climbing into the back seat with him, kissing him like her life depended on it. My stomach churned, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. I wanted to drive away, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away from the scene unfolding in front of me, even though every second of it chipped away at my sanity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a late-night work session gone wrong. This was my wife betraying me in the most intimate, humiliating way possible. When they finally drove off, I stayed parked in that lot for what felt like hours, my mind racing with what to do next. The woman I loved, the life we built together, it was all a lie. Want me to keep going? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her in that car with Tim, laughing, touching him, doing things she used to do with me. I replayed it over and over, wondering how long this had been going on, wondering how I'd missed it. By morning, I was done wondering. I was done being the clueless husband. When Kelly came home that evening, she was all smiles, carrying takeout like nothing was wrong. "Hey, babe! Thought I'd grab your favorite," she said, holding up the bag as if that would erase what I'd seen the night before. "Sit down," I said. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I just motioned to the couch. She hesitated but eventually sat, setting the bag on the coffee table. "Do you have anything you want to tell me?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone, opened the video, and set it on the table between us. She stared at the screen as the recording played, her, in Tim's car, kissing him under the dim glow of the dashboard. Her face turned pale, and her hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "Oh my God!" She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, staring at the phone like it might burst into flames. Then the excuses started. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice trembling. I scoffed. "It's exactly what it looks like, Kelly. You're kissing him. In his car. At night. After lying to me about working late. It was a mistake," she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was stressed and he was just there. That's the best you've got. Stress?" I stood up, pacing the room. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? You've been sneaking around with some random driver, and you expect me to believe it was just stress?" She stood, too, reaching for my arm. "It's not like that. I swear it's just. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. You're always busy, and Tim, he listens to me. He makes me feel appreciated." I pulled away from her touch. "Appreciated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "So instead of talking to me, your husband, you decided to hop into the back seat of his car and solve your problems that way?" The tears were flowing now, but I didn't care. I'd seen her cry before. This time, her tears meant nothing to me. "I was going to end it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what? The marriage or the affair?" She flinched at my words, and I could see the cracks forming in her defenses. But instead of apologizing, instead of owning up to what she'd done, she did the one thing I couldn't forgive. She started blaming me. "This wouldn't have happened if you paid attention to me," she snapped, her tears suddenly turning to anger. You've been so wrapped up in your work, in everything else, that you didn't even notice I was unhappy. Tim noticed. He cared when you didn't. My jaw tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't even speak. You're unbelievable, I finally said. You're trying to make this my fault? She crossed her arms, her face red with frustration. I'm just saying, maybe if you'd been around more, I wouldn't have needed to. To cheat? I interrupted. Because that's what this is, Kelly. It's cheating. And no amount of twisting the narrative is going to change that. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. Save it. I don't want to hear any more excuses. I'm done. Her expression changed, panic flashing in her eyes. Wait, what do you mean, done? I mean I'm filing for divorce, I said, the words coming out colder than I'd expected. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. She started sobbing, pleading, but I didn't care. I walked into the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing. Please, she begged, following me down the hall. We can fix this. I'll stop seeing him. I'll do whatever it takes, just don't leave. I paused, turning to face her one last time. You already left, Kelly. You left the moment you got in that car with him. Let me know if you want more. This is where things really start to heat up. Packing my suitcase felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. Each item I tossed in felt heavier than it should have: shirts, shoes, toothbrush, everyday things now loaded with the weight of an imploding marriage. Kelly trailed after me, sobbing and shouting, a mix of pleas and accusations tumbling out of her mouth. You're overreacting, she yelled, her voice cracking. It was one mistake. I stopped mid-pack, a bitter laugh escaping me. A mistake? Is that what we're calling it now? Because it sure didn't look like a mistake last night when you were locking lips with your driver. Her face twisted in frustration. Fine. I screwed up. But you're not innocent in this either. I turned to face her fully, my blood boiling. No. Don't you dare try to put this on me, Kelly. I worked hard to give us a good life. I stayed faithful, I trusted you, and you threw it all away for some guy you found in an app. She stood there, glaring at me, her cheeks streaked with tears. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, but instead, she doubled down. You don't get it, she shouted. Do you even know how lonely I've been? Tim was there when you weren't. He listened to me. He made me feel alive again. I zipped the suitcase shut with more force than necessary. You think that justifies what you did? If you were so miserable, you could have talked to me. But no, you chose to cheat instead. Her tone softened suddenly, desperation creeping in. We can fix this, can't we? We can go to therapy, work through it. People recover from this kind of thing all the time. I shook my head, slinging the suitcase over my shoulder. Not us. Not this. I don't think I'll ever look at you the same way again, Kelly. The words hit her hard. She slumped onto the bed, her sobs growing quieter, like she finally understood I was serious. But I didn't stick around to watch. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice trembling. To figure out how to start over. The first few nights away from home were rough. I crashed at a buddy's place, explaining the situation in as few words as possible. He didn't press for details, thank God, but his sympathetic pats on the back told me he understood. The next day, I met with a lawyer. I laid it all out, her cheating, the video, the texts. I wanted this divorce to be swift and decisive. No drawn-out arguments, no second chances. She's going to fight this, the lawyer warned me, tapping his pen against a notepad. People like this don't give up easily, especially if they're cornered. I don't care, I said. She can fight all she wants. I'm done playing her game. And oh boy, did Kelly fight. Over the next week, the phone calls started. At first, they were tearful and apologetic. Please come home. I miss you, she'd say, her voice breaking. We can fix this, I know we can. When I didn't bite, the tone shifted. She became angrier, accusing me of being cold, selfish, and overdramatic. Do you think you're perfect? She snapped during one call. You're not. You're just as much to blame for this as I am. I hung up. The worst, though, were the messages. Long, rambling texts that swung wildly between regret and vitriol. One moment she was begging me to come back. The next, she was throwing insults like knives, accusing me of abandoning her. But the icing on the cake came when she brought Tim into it. I just finished a long day at work when my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Tim. Hey, man. Can we talk? Kelly says you've got this all wrong. This guy. This smug, oblivious guy thought he could reason with me? I stared at the screen for a full minute, my hands shaking with rage, before typing out a response. Me. Stay out of my life, Tim. And stay away from my wife. Not that it matters, she won't be my wife much longer. He didn't reply. Not directly, anyway. The next day, Kelly called again, this time furious. Why did you threaten Tim? She demanded. Threaten him? Are you serious? I laughed bitterly. I told him to stay away. That's not a threat, it's a promise. Her voice rose. He's just trying to help. Unlike you, he actually cares about me. That was it. I snapped. Of course he cares. I shouted. You're his free ride, literally. But newsflash, Kelly, he's not going to stick around once this all falls apart. You're just a fling to him. The line went silent for a moment before she whispered. You don't know that. And that's when it hit me, she was clinging to this fantasy, to the idea that this affair was somehow going to fill the void she'd created. But it wouldn't. It never could. Good luck with your driver, I said coldly before hanging up. Let me know if you want to dive into the fallout of her actions or how the divorce drama escalates next. I didn't hear from Kelly for a few days after that last call. It was a strange mix of relief and unease. I knew her well enough to realize she wasn't giving up, she was regrouping. Sure enough, by the end of the week, she reappeared in the most Kelly way possible, dramatic and manipulative. I got home from work late that Friday, exhausted and just wanting to crash, when I found her waiting for me. She was sitting on the steps outside my buddy's house, her face puffy from crying, clutching a manila envelope. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the irritation bubbling inside me. She stood up, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I needed to see you. Please, can we talk? I glanced at the envelope. What's that? She hesitated, then handed it over. It's everything. The whole truth. I wrote it all down. I opened the envelope cautiously. Inside was a stack of handwritten pages, along with a few printed screenshots of text messages. It was all there, her relationship with Tim, how it started, what they'd done, even some moments she regretted. I skimmed a few pages before setting it aside. Why are you giving me this now? Her eyes filled with tears again. Because I want to fix this. I want to show you that I'm serious about making things right. I don't want to lose you. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Kelly, this isn't about fixing things anymore. It's about consequences. You made your choice. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I was stupid. I let things get out of control, but I still love you. Doesn't that count for something? Her words hit a nerve, but not in the way she hoped. Love? I said, my voice cold. You don't do what you did to someone you love. Her face crumpled, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered what she'd done, what I'd seen in that car, what I'd heard in her voice when she defended him. I'll think about what you've written, I said, though I already knew it wouldn't change anything. But I need space, Kelly. You need to go. She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she nodded and walked away. I watched her get into her car and drive off, wondering if she'd really let me have the time I asked for. The next morning, I got my answer. My phone lit up with a notification from Instagram. It was a tag from an unfamiliar account, a single post with the caption, "The truth about my husband." I opened it, my heart sinking as I saw the photo, a blurry screenshot of one of her handwritten pages. It was followed by a long, rambling explanation about how she'd made mistakes, but had been driven to it by my neglect and emotional distance. She didn't name me directly, but anyone who knew us would know exactly who she was talking about. It was a desperate move, one I should have expected but still managed to catch me off guard. "Are you kidding me?" I muttered, dialing her number. She picked up on the first ring. "I didn't mean for you to see that yet," she said quickly. "Yet?" I barked. "You posted our private life for the world to see, Kelly. What the hell is wrong with you?" "I just wanted people to understand my side," she said, her voice defensive. "You're making me out to be a monster, but it's not that simple." "Oh, it's simple," I shot back. "You cheated. End of story. Stop trying to make yourself the victim here, it's pathetic." The argument went nowhere, as expected. She refused to take the post down, claiming she had the right to defend herself. It wasn't until my lawyer sent her a warning that she finally deleted it. But the damage was already done. People started reaching out, mutual friends, acquaintances, even coworkers. Some offered sympathy, others pried for gossip. It was humiliating, but also oddly clarifying. I realized how little I cared about what anyone else thought. This wasn't about them. It was about me reclaiming my life. And if Kelly wanted to play dirty, I was ready. I sent the stack of handwritten pages to my lawyer, who called me 2 hours later. "This is gold," he said, his voice practically buzzing. "She basically confessed to everything. If she wants a fight, we've got her cornered." Good. Because I was done playing nice. Let me know if you want to see how the court battle unfolds, or if you'd like to dive deeper into Kelly's spiraling attempts to save face. After Kelly's Instagram stunt, I knew things were only going to get messier. She had made it clear she wasn't going to accept the divorce quietly, and her attempts to rewrite the narrative were just getting started. A week later, my lawyer, Paul, called me into his office to review her official response to the divorce filing. I wasn't expecting much beyond the usual legal posturing, but what I found instead was a nuclear-level escalation. "She's contesting everything," Paul said, handing me the documents. I flipped through the pages, my jaw tightening as I read the claims. Kelly was accusing me of emotional neglect and abandonment. She even threw in some nonsense about how I'd forced her to rely on Tim for support because I was never there for her. "She's trying to paint you as the bad guy," Paul continued. "Classic deflection. She's hoping to gain leverage in negotiations, or at least muddy the waters enough to make herself look like a victim." I let out a bitter laugh. "So she cheats on me, and somehow I'm the bad guy. Unreal." "It's desperate," Paul said, leaning back in his chair. "And it's not going to hold up in court. But we need to be ready for her to dig deeper. If she's willing to lie about this, who knows what else she'll come up with." And come up with things she did. Over the next few weeks, Kelly unleashed a campaign of chaos. She started reaching out to mutual friends, spinning stories about how I had checked out of the marriage long before she met Tim. A few of them bought into her sob story, but most saw through it. "She called me yesterday," one of our friends, Lauren, said during a coffee meet-up. "She was crying about how you abandoned her emotionally, but honestly, it just sounded like she was trying to make excuses for herself." "She's good at that," I muttered. Lauren leaned in, lowering her voice. "She's also still seeing Tim, you know. I saw them at the coffee shop near her office last week. They looked cozy." Hearing that shouldn't have stung. After all, I'd already decided I was done with her, but it did. Maybe it was the lingering bitterness, or just the sheer disrespect of her carrying on with him, while trying to gaslight everyone into thinking I was the problem. Then came the court hearing. The first session was tense, to say the least. Kelly showed up with her own lawyer, a slick-talking guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a courtroom drama. Tim wasn't there, but his presence loomed in the air like a bad smell. Kelly sat across from me, her face a mask of forced calm. She didn't look at me once, though I caught her whispering furiously to her lawyer when Paul presented the evidence we'd collected: the handwritten confession, the financial records showing she'd spent money from our joint account on her secret outings with Tim, and, of course, the video. The judge didn't look impressed by her excuses. "This isn't a case of emotional neglect," he said, his voice sharp. "This is a case of infidelity, plain and simple. And the evidence is clear." Kelly's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge shut him down. "I suggest you focus on mitigating damages instead of wasting the court's time with baseless claims." It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. Watching Kelly squirm under the judge's scrutiny felt like justice, even if it didn't erase the pain she'd caused. After the hearing, Kelly cornered me in the hallway. "Is this really what you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, keeping my expression neutral. "You mean accountability?" "Yeah, Kelly, it's exactly what I want." Her face twisted in anger. "You're just trying to punish me. You don't care about fixing anything, you just want to hurt me." I shook my head. "You hurt yourself. I'm just making sure you deal with the consequences." She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I'd wasted enough time on her lies. Let me know if you want to see how Tim factors back in or how Kelly's attempts to regain control spiral further out of hand. I thought the worst of the storm was behind me, but then Tim decided to make his grand entrance. It started with a text. "Tim. Hey man. Can we talk? I think we're misunderstanding each other here." The audacity of this guy. I stared at the message for a solid minute before deciding to ignore it. I wasn't interested in giving him the satisfaction of a response. But Tim wasn't one to take a hint. A few days later, I came home from work to find him parked in front of my buddy's house. He was leaning against his car, arms crossed, as if this was some kind of casual meet-up. My stomach churned at the sight of him. I parked down the block and walked up, keeping my voice calm. "What are you doing here?" He straightened up, flashing what I'm sure he thought was a charming smile. "Look, man, I just want to clear the air. This whole thing with Kelly, it's gotten out of hand." "Out of hand?" That was his take. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "You mean you slept with my wife and helped destroy my marriage?" "Yeah, Tim, I'd say that's a bit out of hand." He held up his hands defensively. "Okay, yeah, I messed up. But it wasn't just me. Kelly told me you two were practically done before I ever got involved." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "You think that makes it okay? You think that excuses what you did?" Tim's smirk faltered. "I'm not trying to make excuses. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I care about her, man. I love her." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because I believed him, but because of how delusional they were. "You love her?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You've known her for what, 6 months? You don't love her. You just love the idea of her." Tim looked like he wanted to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. "Let me make this crystal clear," I said, stepping closer. "You and Kelly are nothing to me now. You can have each other, for all I care. But if you ever show up here again, we're going to have a serious problem." He stared at me for a moment, his jaw tightening, but then he nodded. "Fine. I'll back off. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I just walked past him into the house, slamming the door behind me. After Tim's little visit, things took a sharp turn, for Kelly. Word about her affair had started spreading, thanks to her own social media posts and a few loose-lipped acquaintances. People who once admired her were now avoiding her like the plague. Friends stopped returning her calls, and co-workers were giving her the cold shoulder. It wasn't just social fallout either. Kelly had been up for a promotion at work, but that quietly disappeared. Apparently, management didn't want to deal with the drama of her personal life spilling over into the office. She called me one night, her voice thick with desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Me?" I said, laughing into the phone. "Kelly, you did this to yourself." She launched into a tirade about how I'd ruined her reputation, how I'd turned everyone against her. I let her rant for a while before cutting her off. Newsflash, Kelly, people aren't mad because of what I did. They're mad because of what you did. Stop blaming everyone else for your choices. Her silence on the other end was deafening. Just when I thought Kelly couldn't sink lower, I heard the news: Tim dumped her. I found out through Lauren, who called me one afternoon with the juicy details. Apparently, he told her it was too much drama, she said, barely hiding her amusement. I couldn't help but laugh. So, the guy who knowingly got involved with a married woman is suddenly too good for drama? That's rich. Lauren snorted. Right? But honestly, it gets better. She's been telling people she's the one who ended it, but everyone knows the truth. He ghosted her. It was almost poetic. Kelly, who had thrown away her marriage for a fling, now left alone and humiliated by the very man she thought would save her. A few weeks later, Kelly reached out one last time. She wanted to meet in person. To talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I didn't trust her motives, but part of me wanted to hear her out. We met at a neutral spot, a small cafe neither of us had any emotional ties to. She looked different, tired, defeated, like the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said quietly, stirring her coffee. For everything. It was the most genuine thing I'd heard from her in months, but it didn't soften the walls I'd built around myself. I appreciate that, I said. But it doesn't change anything. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know. I hope someday you can forgive me. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if I could ever truly forgive her, but I knew I couldn't carry the anger forever either. I'll try, I said finally. For my own sake. She gave me a sad smile, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of peace. Let me know if you want the aftermath explored or if you'd like to wrap up this saga here. After the cafe meeting with Kelly, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Not because everything was fixed, far from it, but because I realized I was finally done carrying the wreckage of our marriage. Kelly texted me once or twice after that day, but I kept my responses short and polite. There was nothing left to say, nothing to salvage. The divorce process was still ongoing, but the major battles were over. My lawyer had made sure I walked away with what was fair, my dignity intact and no financial traps waiting for me. But the real victory wasn't in court. It was in the small things: waking up without knots in my stomach, going to work without dreading what I might come home to, rediscovering parts of myself I had lost in the chaos. I threw myself into work, hobbies, and friendships I'd neglected. My weekends filled up with basketball games, hikes, and long nights swapping stories with friends over beers. It was like I'd stepped out of a fog and into a life that was finally mine again. Months later, just as I was settling into my new normal, my phone buzzed with an unexpected name on the screen: Lauren. Hey, what's up? I asked, leaning back in my chair. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice tinged with a mix of shock and amusement. Guess who Kelly's been calling? I sighed, already bracing for the answer. Who? Tim, she said, barely able to suppress a laugh. She's trying to get him back. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course she is. And let me guess, it's not going well? Not even a little, Lauren said. Word is, he's been ignoring her completely. She even showed up at his place unannounced, and he slammed the door in her face. It was the kind of karmic justice I didn't need to celebrate but couldn't help enjoying a little. Kelly had burned every bridge, and now she was left to deal with the consequences alone. By the time the divorce was finalized, I'd already moved into a new apartment, a sleek, modern space that felt nothing like the house Kelly and I had shared. It was my sanctuary, free of memories and drama. One night, while unpacking a box of old photos, I found a picture of Kelly and me from our honeymoon. We were smiling, carefree, and so obviously in love. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the people we used to be. But then I set the photo aside, realizing it belonged to a chapter of my life that was over. Life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect it. About a year after everything had gone down, I bumped into an old acquaintance at a friend's party. Her name was Rachel, someone I'd known casually through mutual friends but never really gotten to know. We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. She was smart, funny, and down to earth, everything I'd forgotten I could want in a partner. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other. There was no drama, no games, just easy, honest connection. It was refreshing in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The last time I saw Kelly was at a mutual friend's wedding. She was there alone, looking a little lost among the crowd. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small, tentative wave. I nodded back, but I didn't approach her. There was nothing left to say. Rachel was by my side, laughing at a joke someone had just told. I turned to her, and she smiled at me, her eyes sparkling in the way Kelly's never did. In that moment, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Kelly had made her choices, and so had I. And while our story had ended in betrayal and heartbreak, it had also led me here, to a place where I could finally be happy again. That night, as Rachel and I danced under the soft glow of string lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Kelly was a chapter, but Rachel? She was the beginning of a new book.